All right, so we're going to talk about PNF, vestibular, and then imaging today. And again, I'll work on a brief put together the PowerPoint. I don't know where my PowerPoint went for this. I had it literally last night, but it is in the ether somewhere, the internet ether. I'm hoping it's saved to my OneDrive, but for some reason, OneDrive's down right now. So when it comes to these three topics, the reason I want to cover them, imaging seems to be picking up on your questions on the board. When I went through the extent of my imaging questions for my PTA exam is the X-ray is an image. Yes, no. That was about all they asked for us. Now that's picked up. Same thing with PNF. PNF was actually a large chunk of my exam. And I remember when I was, this is how kind of type A I was. When I was going through my exam, I was actually ticking off as I got questions on specific subjects. So if I got PNF question, I marked off that. I remember I was tracking PNF, I was tracking autonomic dysreflexia and cardio. And my two top questions were PNF and autonomic dysreflexia. I had 19 questions on autonomic dysreflexia. So if you guys don't think about, if you don't think that topic that I covered 90,000 times was important, yeah. I just had somebody that took the test in January and said they got about 12 questions on autonomic dysreflexia. So it's an easy way to bump up your score, but PNF is just about as important. And then vestibular is becoming more and more popular questions on the board because our population as a whole is getting older, especially in this area, the Phoenix area, the general area that we're in. Why does this population tend to trend towards the older population in this area? Why do we see a lot more old people here in Phoenix than we see maybe in, I don't know, Seattle? Why do they flock to this area? Yeah, weather, cheaper to retire, right? We are a retirement community, it's true, right? And let's face it, old people like gambling, right? It's just, there's no other answer to that. Go down to Sam's Town once on any day, right? Just look at Wall Street, but just go down to, it's funny, they'll gamble on down at Sam's Town, but man, watch out when they lose money on Wall Street. But go down to Sam's Town any given day in the middle of the day and walk around and see how many people you have that are, my age. Yeah, good, maybe more than should be. And then see how many people your age, not as many, but then look at all of the older folks that are 65 and older. And sometimes that can be sad because that they may be spending their last little bit of, Medicare or whatever on trying to pull the one-armed bandit so they can become rich. And sometimes that happens, but you have a better chance of being struck by lightning in a moving car than winning most casino games. So we are trending towards a retirement community, which means that we are also trending towards a community that has vestibular issues heavily, right? Because as we get older, the inner ear kind of breaks down. The more the inner ear breaks down, the more balance issues they have. And so there's a lot of crossover between PNF and vestibular as far as helping patients, but they are very distinct subjects, right? So I gave you, back when I taught you PNF back in semester 3, a whole spiel or about 3 slides worth of history. Not so important for the history. I wanted you guys to understand the history of PNF, but it's not like they're going to ask you about Krabata or Kravis, right? They're not going to ask you about those people. What they are going to ask you is the specific parts of PNF, right? So when it says proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, what does that mean? What does it mean when we say proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation? So proprioceptive is what? When we say we use proprioception, we're using what? Yeah, we're knowing where we are in space. Exactly, right? Proprioceptive is using all of those Pacini corpuscles, the Meissner discs, all those in our body to tell where our limbs are in space, right? If I raise my arm up here, I've got receptors throughout my whole arm telling me that my arm is elevated. I even have receptors down in my blood vessels telling me my arm is elevated because it's going to have to increase the blood pressure to get the blood up to my fingertips. So that's part of proprioceptive. Neuromuscular means we're dealing with the nervous system in conjunction with the musculoskeletal system. And this can be kind of important with PNF because a lot of times we're going to use tapping and, key points of contact, if you remember. Where about in the muscle does that nerve that innervates it jump into the muscle? Like if I had to go with my bicep here, right? Where about is that musculocutaneous diving into my bicep? Back to anatomy. I know, a long time ago, and land far, far away. So in most muscles, the nerve actually dives in right about midpoint. Yeah, right about that belly, right? So, if I'm here to look at the bicep's going to be curled this way. Somewhere around here is where that neuromuscular junction is. So that means when I'm giving points of contact or I need to do tapping, I should be kind of on that neuromuscular contact because it's similar to like if you guys have ever jumped a car with jumper cables. Right? And ever had that problem where for whatever reason, those jumper cables just aren't delivering the energy and then you move them around just a tad and all of a sudden it delivers the energy. Same idea here. If I'm tapping up here, I'm giving feedback to different muscles versus tapping on the bicep itself. So you kind of have to understand where that is. Do you guys remember the term irradiation? Because we talked about that in PNF. What does irradiation mean? This is where we get in a nuclear, like we go to Chernobyl and we get irradiated, right? That's what it means. So in the martial arts term, we actually use irradiation, but we use different terms for it. Like we'll talk about cross torque and energy transfer and stuff like that. Irradiation is channeling energy from one muscle to another. Right? So if I'm having problems with my deltoid, irradiation says that maybe if I fire on my bicep, maybe I can trigger my deltoid to fire. Because again, in the whole, we don't move. It's not like I go, I'm going to reach overhead, bend bicep, pronate, extend shoulder, abduct shoulder. No, I move in a diagonal pattern to get to that point. So all the muscles have to work in coordination. So that irradiation says that, well, hey, hopefully if I use irradiation and this theory of successive induction, right, where I get a little bit more response from my agonist muscle when I trigger my antagonist, right? What's that called when we have those two muscles working against each other? Where we have the agonist and antagonist working against each other. Synergy, good. Okay, that's part of it. Yep. And we're going to talk about that actually a bit because there's a lot more questions on synergy now on the boards. But remember, when the agonist contracts, the antagonist does what? Relaxes, right? That's that idea of reciprocal inhibition, right? So when one contracts, the other is inhibited. And that allows us to actually regulate those muscles. That allows us to move, right? Just imagine how much fun it would be. Like, I know that Dylan does softball and baseball. Just imagine how much fun it would be if you're standing there with the bat in hand and you go to swing the bat and all of a sudden all the muscles fire at once. You're stuck there. You're not going to be able to do anything. So you need, when one muscle fires, for the other muscles to relax so you can get that swing through. That shows you how good I am at baseball. You saw that great swing there, right, Dylan? That was great. I hit nothing. The only thing I get hit is by the baseballs in the actual the ball cage. So when we're, and like I said, this is kind of a 50,000 foot overview of talking about PNF. I'm not going to get totally into the weeds here. I'm trying to cover the topics that I know there are questions in the boards about. So that reciprocal inhibition is one form of that contract-relax relationship, right? The other is those two big reflexes. Do you remember what the two big reflexes we talked about at all? Dealing with the muscle spindles and the GTO. The GTO, no, sorry, that was a song from the 50s. So do you remember the myotatic and inverse myotatic reflex at all? Even at like the name triggers something in your brain, but you don't remember it. Right, so let me bring up my little whiteboard here. That way I have something to write with. There we go. So there we are. Now I bring up my thing so I can see if you guys have any questions. Chat, there we go. So we had that myotatic reflex, an inverse myotatic reflex. And if you remember, I briefly told you that myotatic, because it has two words, relates to the sensory receptor that has two words, the muscle spindles. And the inverse myotatic, because it has three words, relates to the GTO, the Golgi tendon organs. And that way they kind of stick together. Do you remember? Oh, Jared's like, yeah, I remember a little bit about that. I can see it in his brain. Right? This helps keep us from tearing our muscles. Remember that briefly? So the other term for the myotatic was the stretch reflex. And then we had the Golgi tendon reflex was the other term for that. Dylan's like, it's starting to come back, kind of. This is why we cover a review, because these are the ones that kind of come back and haunt us. So with the stretch reflex, remember what it says is, so, yep, there you go. Yes, you remember that briefly. Good, 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 right? So with the stretch reflex, right? So what's my biceps job? What are the three main motions the bicep does? Elbow flexion, good. What's it do at the radial ulnar, right? So we get supination, right? And what do we get at the shoulder? That abduction, shoulder flexion, good, right? So we've got all three of those. So that means if we want to stretch the bicep out, we have to go in total reverse of all those motions, right? So that means we have to go elbow extension, forearm pronation, and shoulder extension, right? That gets that bicep put on max stretch. And if I have my arm back here like this, if I go far enough back, eventually those muscle spindles are going to fire and say, oh my God, you idiot, you're stretching me too far. And what's going to happen then? With that stretch reflex, it's going to cause me to do what? Yeah, it's going to cause me to come back. Yeah, ideally to return to neutral, but at least it's going to fire me to come back here, right? Say, hey, no, 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 yes, 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 stop that. That's to keep that muscle from literally stretching apart at the middle, right? So that the muscle belly itself doesn't rip. Versus the Golgi tendon reflex or the inverse myotatic, that's the idea of having a weight, right? So I've got a weight in my hand. This is by far not a weight. and I'm doing a curl, right? And maybe instead of it being a weight that I can curl, it's, I grabbed a 75-pound dumbbell for some stupid reason. And I'm doing that curl and I get here and all of a sudden my Golgi tendon organs go, hey, if you keep lifting this, I am going to rip off the attachment sites. And so what's it going to do then? It's going to stop the contraction and basically drop out, right? That's that idea of dropping that weight. It's going to cause the muscle to relax so you don't tear. The downside, like we talked about briefly, is the inverse myotatic is a little bit stronger than the myotatic. So there are times where if that happens, that myotatic reflex won't happen when it drops out, and you may still tear the muscle. But the idea is it's better to tear the muscle than to rip the tendon off the arm, right? We can get over a torn muscle. We don't get over very much the tendon ripping off the insertion, right? Right, so the inverse, the myotatic prevents extreme stretch. And then the inverse myotatic prevents overload on extreme contraction. So does that help ring a little bit of a bell up there in your brain? And so then just when you talk about that at the boards level, right, where are the muscle spindles located at? It's in the name. The muscle spindles are located in the muscle. Yeah, right, in the actual muscle belly itself. The further you get out towards those tendinous junctions, the less muscle spindles you have. Right? But when you get out to those tendinous junctions, now what are you starting to get? The GTOs, the Golgi tendon organs, right? So in the muscle belly, muscle spindles, in the tendons, GTOs. They actually name themselves for themselves. All right, so we covered that kind of stuff that I want to cover. Let's re-talk patterns just so that we can get the brief remembrance of the patterns, right? With the patterns of PNF, which is all most people know about PNF. It's true. That's most people, that's all they remember is, oh, the pattern, remember that, right? The patterns are labeled after the diagonals they go in, right? Diagonal 1 or diagonal 2, and then are named after the major muscle group that's moving. So we have diagonal 1, right? Diagonal 1 is eating the apple and throwing it away, right? Coming up and across. So that's diagonal 1, right? Diagonal 2, what was diagonal 2's remembrance? Draw the sword, right? Or Saturday Night Fever, whatever you want to remember, right? Up and out, back and down. Now, the number one question I get from students on the PNF patterns is, am I going to have to remember every single, pronation, supination, flexion, blah, 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 blah? Not typically. But you might get a question that says something like, your patient is having trouble reaching overhead to put things into cabinets. Which diagonal pattern would be most beneficial to progress towards functional recovery? Okay, D2 upper extremity. So I already got one answer, right? Which particular part of D2 upper extremity? So remember, because there's flexion and extension pattern. So extension would come back to the body, right? Flexion pattern, reaching up and out and away, right? This pattern here, there's not much that's going to help this person reaching up and across the body, right? Or reaching up to cabinets. Or that D1's out. So like that would be one where the question will say at the bottom, A, D1 flexion, B, D2 extension, D2 flexion, D1 extension, right? It'll give you all 4 of those choices for the upper extremity. And that's when you go, okay, D1. Yeah, that's out. Mark both those. And so on your boards, just to let you guys know, you will have the ability, and we're going to talk more about this when the boards start happening. You will have the ability to go through and cross out answers like that. So like you can click on a specific answer and it crosses it out, which can be helpful because if you know that my D1 pattern is out, you can cross out both those D1 patterns and then focus on just the 2 D2 patterns. Takes away distractions a little bit. That can be really useful because that way, if you mark that question for review, when you come back, you'll go, oh yeah, I already took those 2 answers out. Okay, which of these is the better answer? Right? So we all agree that D2 is the right answer, but you have to remember with the flexion and extension patterns, it's the shoulder that's telling you where it's moving, right? So when I come up and out, the shoulder is going into flexion. So that means that D2 flexion would be the one we want to practice. Does that mean we're not going to do D2 extension? No, we're probably going to have still working down in, but the main pattern we're going to be working on is reaching up and out, reaching up and out, reaching up and out. So let's change that. And now let's think of we've got a professional hacky sack player. Okay, good. So Dylan says that during his rotations, CI said he's never seen D1 with any elbow flexion. Okay. It depends upon what you're doing. I mean, that kind of counter. So he just has them like this the whole time. Huh. Okay. Okay. Now that makes sense. Resistive PNF, that kind of makes sense a little bit. But it also depends upon what the goal is. If I'm working with the stroke patient, I will do flexion, especially coming up and across, even in resistive, because I want them to be able to feed themselves. So it just really depends upon the goals, but I could see that. Shoulder impingement, I could see. Yeah, I mean, at that point, we're not really working the elbow so much. So yeah, I mean, that's why in that pattern, it said shoulder or elbow flexion extension for both those areas, right? You can do either. So it just depends upon the goal of the patient too. So let's think now we've got a professional hacky sack player. Specifically in coming up and across the body and kicking the hacky sack up into the air. So hitting it with the inside of the foot. Which pattern are we going to work on for that patient? I don't know why we're playing a professional hacky sack player. Bear with me here. So remember with D1, down and out, right? D1 lower extremity. Okay, good. Flexion or extension pattern. Flexion, good. Right? So D1 down and out, up and in. Same idea. It almost matches the upper extremity, right? Up and in. So those are the types of questions you're going to get on the patterns. It's not going to be during D1 flexion pattern of the lower extremity, what position is the toe in? You're not going to get a question like that. And if you do, I don't know what to tell you because I rarely, if ever, saw a question like that. Is it important to know for if you ever become specialized in neuro? Absolutely. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's not important. But most of the times that I've dealt with patients, you know, so like Dylan said there, they kept straight arms. Most of the patients I've dealt with are neuro patients. And am I ever going to fully get the flexion of the hand? Maybe not. So I don't totally work on that, whereas I'm more worried about gross motor movement. So that's kind of the types of stuff you're going to get. I've also seen questions in the boards where they ask you what the D stands for in PNF, which to me, if you get that question, you should literally say a prayer to whatever God and or gods you worship and click diagonal and move on. Right? That should be the question that, yeah, those are the questions that, and those are the questions that are going to get you, right? Because what's going to happen when you see that question? Yeah, you're going to go, wait, this is too easy. They're trying to trick me here. And in reality, it's just a level 1 question that they're just trying to see if you're paying attention, right? Those questions I call the wake up questions, right? You may get one that's like, you know, what is the origin of Anconius or something like that? It's an easy question, but you will overthink it. So don't overthink, right? When you're working on your boards, your gut is your best answer. If your gut says it's C, it's probably C. Unless, of course, you know, you've had too much to eat the morning and the gut's saying other things, but yeah, don't second guess, right? Yeah, no, second guesses will kill you. I'm working right now with one student that has failed the boards twice now. And each time that student has told me, you know, Mr. McKeever, I keep second guessing my answers. And the last time they took the boards, they got a 594. Right? And there's a chance that one of those second guessed questions they picked could have been a level 3, and that could have been a passing score for them. So don't second guess your answers. Then for PNF, some of the other stuff you might cover or you might get a question on is, what is the difference between verbal cueing, right, versus visual cueing versus tactile cueing? Verbal cueing is what? Talking, yeah, right? So that's the, okay, up and in, down and out, up and in, down and out. Tactile cueing is what? Touching, yes, right? T for touch. So that's when you're on the muscle, maybe having them contract up. It's physically guiding them through it. It's using your body to guide them, right? And then what was the other one? I said visual, right? Visual cueing. What would be visual cueing? Showing, right? And also they're going to follow visual cueing because that's one of the things you want them to do when they're doing it, right? Watch your hand, see how it's moving, right? Those are all parts of PNF because they help the patient understand what they're doing. Okay, so that covers low-level PNF. Now I want to talk about when we start getting into the more complicated PNF, when we start talking about getting into the definitions of PNF. So this is where we lose a lot of people most times, because this is where, and let me clear my screen here. So this is where we get into terms like, let's see how bad Mr. McKeever can spell here. Just trying to write out some of them here. I can spell today. Wow, no, I can't. So these types of terms here, does some of these seem to ring a bell when you looked at them before? Do any of them look familiar? I think I forgot one, agonist reversals. Okay. So let's start at the top up here. Rhythmic initiation. Do you remember what I told you to remember about rhythmic initiation? What's the other term for that? The most basic type of movement we can do with the patient. That we are going to do for them. Yes, right? So remember, when you think of rhythmic initiation, you're thinking PROM. So that means no matter what stuff you're doing, whether you're doing rocking, right? Whether you're doing a pattern, whatever you're doing, rhythmic initiation is the start of rhythm. So you are doing it for them. You're moving them through that pattern. You're helping them get that pattern. They're not really doing anything than watching and paying attention to what's going on. So that's kind of the idea of rhythmic initiation. That's where you're going to start at the basics, right? You're going to say, okay, you don't need to do anything. What is my key term for that one? I'm going to tell the patient to do what? Show, tell, do. Good. Yep. What am I going to tell them to do? Relax. Yeah. Right? Because we're trying to get that shoulder, that elbow, that hip, whatever it may be, moving through that motion, right? This is not a resistive PNF. Reversal of agonist is an AROM motion, right? And just think of what reversal of agonist means. Reversal of agonist. Actually, I put this on the wrong area here. Hold on here. Slow reversal should be up there. Just thought of that. This is your most common form of PNF. You're going to see. This is your resistive PNF. So this is where, as they come up and across, pull, 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 pull. Good. Now open up, push, 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 push. Pull, 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 pull. All I'm doing is reversing my agonist, right? I'm reversing the isotonic contraction of the agonist muscle. I'm just changing directions, and that's where my patterns and my contact points are going to shift as I'm going through, right? Because I'm going to provide them with resistance one way, and then resistance the other way, and then resistance this way, and then resistance that way. That literally is, that's why I think slow reversals helps me remember this one a little bit. Dynamic reversals is another term I've heard. There's another weird one for this. Irradiated contraction, something or other. I forget, there's another term for it in PNF, but not one you're going to get on your boards. You may see a reversal of agonist or slow reversals. You're just reversing the direction of the isotonic contraction. That's it. You don't really have to think too hard into that one. And don't overthink that one. It's exactly like it says. Right? So then we've got repeated contract, repeated stretch. Gee, that one sounds really easy when you think about it, doesn't it? Repeated contract, repeated stretch. Right? So this is where you're going to contract the muscle and then do what to it? Says it in the name, stretch it. That's it. That's really all you have to know about that one, right? So why would that work out? Why would that enhance? Yes, it would be very much, yes. So muscle energy technique builds off this 100%. You're exactly right, Dylan. Right? So think about it. If I contract the muscle and then I stretch it, right? I've kind of tired it out. And so once I've tired it out, now it will relax afterwards and it'll stretch a little bit further. That's exactly like muscle energy technique. So it's just kind of thinking, okay, this is what I'm contracting. Yeah, right. You can get really good range of motions with this. Absolutely. Right. But again, this is one where you'll look at this and go, big words. And you just look at it and go, no, okay, wait a minute. Repeated contract, repeated stretch. I'm going to use a contraction of a muscle to improve my stretchability. That's it. Stabilizing, yeah, contract, relax would be an excellent method of it, right? Yeah. stabilizing reversals. So stabilizing reversals, I also hear as, and I put it as the wrong one, I also hear call, where's, whoop, that's up there, that's not where I want it to be. Down here, stabilizing. When you hear stabilizing, what kind of word do you think, what's the ISO word you think of? Stable, oh, yeah, yeah. What's the ISO word you think of though? Which ISO word means stabilized? Because you have isotonic, isometric, good. Right, you may hear it as stabilizing isometrics. Because remember, when we're doing stuff, like if you have a patient, how many of you guys had a patient with a shoulder, maybe a shoulder rotator cuff tear, something like that, when you're out in clinics? Lots, right? What was some of the first exercises you had them doing? Right? Isometric activities, ball on the wall, isometrics on the wall, isometrics against the door, stuff like that, because the idea of an isometric is to stabilize. So same idea here. With stabilizing reversals, you're only going to allow a very small range of motion, just enough to kind of get the muscle firing, and then you're going to get a hold. So maybe with D1, you might only get, 2 or 3 inches of motion, and they get to a point, and then you're going to put maximal resistance into an isometric hold. And the goal is to get all those muscles in that stabilizing pattern, especially if we're talking the shoulder, all that rotator cuff to lock in and protect the shoulder. But taking this an advanced step further, and this is mainly going a little bit further than your boards, but taking an advanced step further, if you really want to work the stabilizing muscles, would you want them closer to an open pack position or a closed pack position? Which is going to be more stable? Yeah, closed pack, right? So doing stabilizing isometrics out here is going to be really hard, right? Because my shoulder's pretty open there. But if I'm up and across like this, is it going to be a little easier for me? Right, I can just move my arm up and across here, and I can feel all of those rotator cuff kind of locked in on that shoulder. So now if I'm doing short motions with isometric holds, it's a lot easier for me to do my isometrics out here than it is way out here where I'm open. So that means when you start the patient with a stabilizing isometric or stabilizing reversal, you're going to start them closer to closed pack. And as they advance, you're going to move further and further out. Does that make sense? Does everyone see where I'm going with this, or do I need to draw a map? Okay, so Jaira says yep, so we'll go with yep. Yep is the word. Okay, drawing a map would be useful, right? So let's see here. Let me see how bad I can draw here. So shoulder, elbow, wrist. So let's think about this just quickly. And don't overthink this. Just kind of run through your brain quickly. What would be a good closed pack position for the shoulder? What would be some motions we'd want for the shoulder itself, right? Flexed and adducted, good, right? And then maybe what's this coming across the chest called? Because remember, we have this motion as well. Maybe a little bit of internal rotation, good. And then that horizontal AD duct, right? There we go. Or AD duct, I'm sorry, ADD, I'm getting ADD. Elbow. Ideally, what's the most closed pack position of the elbow? That one's an easy one. Come on, guys. When is the olecranon locked into the fossa? Extension, right? which goes back to that question that Dylan had, or the comment that Dylan had with my CI had my patient doing all extension activities. Well, why did he do that? Well, he was eliminating the elbow from helping the patient cheat. Right? If I'm locked out here and closed packed, I can't really use those muscles. I can't use the bicep to help me cheat. Right? Especially if I'm doing shoulder motion, if I have my elbow bent a little bit, I have a lot more use of my bicep to help shoulder flexion. Right? Or if I'm locked out, now that bicep's locked out, I can't do anything with it. I can't cheat. I can only use my deltoids and stuff like that. Right? So now we're kind of here, right? And then the wrist, what is closed pack for the wrist? And this is a trick question. What's closed pack for the wrist? Either what? Well, neutral is actually open packed. So either extension or flexion can be closed packed, right? Flexion's a little bit more closed packed just because of the way the bones come together. But technically, you're kind of in a closed pack position in both directions. Right? That neutral position is where we can mobilize the wrist. Right? Try it yourself. Put your wrist into extreme flexion and then try to move the bones in the wrist once. Ow, that actually hurt. It'll move. Yeah, it hurts. It's not comfortable. Right? But if you've got it in kind of neutral, now you can kind of glide those bones a little bit. So the closer we kind of have to this position up here with that elbow locked as much as I can, and start doing those stabilizing isometrics, right? I'm able to hold that a little bit better. And then maybe I open the wrist up a little bit and start working the wrist isometrics. Then maybe the elbow, I flex a little bit. Then maybe the shoulder, I start extending a little bit. I make it progressively harder for the patient so that it gets more and more work on those stabilizers of the shoulder. And we all know, just working with patients, rotator cuffs suck for most patients, right? They're just not a solid, and probably for you guys, honestly, even. I know for me, my rotator cuff is just not something I focus on, right? If I'm actually working out, it's not like I sit there going, yeah, internal rotation, yeah, get that external rotation going, right? No, I'm doing like curls, shoulder flexion, stuff like that, and I kind of forget about my rotator cuff just because it's not something we think of on a daily basis. Right? The only time you see people working at internal rotation are professional arm wrestlers. Right? Those guys are scary. Don't ever cross them. All right. Let's talk about that. Alternating isometrics, right? Alternating isometrics is, I'm trying to think of a way. So if stabilizing reversals means we have a little bit of motion going, alternating isometrics is more, and again, alternating isometrics and rhythmic stabilization, I think of more in the terms of the trunk and core. Yeah, it's holding, right? I typically use them more in the trunk and core than I use them in the extremity, right? So alternating isometrics is the one that's linear versus rhythmic stabilization, which is all directions. Right? So alternating isometrics where you have the person sit up nice and tall and you're giving them pushes forward and back, forward and back. I'm going to headbutt my microphone. That'd be hilarious. Forward and back, forward and back, forward and back. Versus rhythmic stabilization, you're going to say, okay, hold your core nice and tight, and that's where you just kind of bang them all over the place. Alternating isometrics usually don't have a pattern, they're just a linear pattern. At least for your boards. Now, are there other theories for this? Absolutely. Right? But for your boards, just remember that alternating isometrics is a linear motion, forward, back, side, side, single diagonal pattern. Whereas rhythmic stabe is bang, 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 knocking them all over the place. Does that make sense? Now that can apply to the joints as well, right? I could do that with the shoulder. Remember we saw that me do that with the shoulder with somebody. But when I think of these two, I'm thinking more core than I think anything else. Because doing these, either of these two, with a joint is just mean. They're not very pleasant on joints. Okay, where did my chat box go? There it goes. Sorry, I lost you guys for a second. So agonist, reversal, or combination of isotonics. So this is one. Yeah, so linear pattern, yeah. So I can answer that. That's a good question. So like if I'm working my core here, right? So I'm sitting up nice and tall. Let me get sitting up nice and tall in my chair. You would come to me and say, okay, Mr. McKeever, we're going to work on your core today. I'm going to push you forward and back. I don't want you to move. And that's going to be my linear motion. I can do diagonals too, as long as that motion is in the same line. Like I wouldn't want to do a diagonal like this. So diagonal, I could do side to side. If I'm working the neck, I could do up and down. Right? I could say, I'm going to push you down, I'm going to push you up, don't let me move you. And the patient has to hold their neck, right? Or I'm going to do rotation. So I'm going to push you left and I'm going to push you right. Don't let me move you. Right? And I've got to stabilize my neck muscles. Versus that rhythmic stabilization. Now I'm going to come in and we're going to use my neck as an example because it's an easy, I can push my head around a lot easier. Then you're going to come in and say, okay, now what I want you to do is I'm going to push you all around. I don't like to say push around. I'm going to give you perturbations. I'm going to move you around a little bit. I'm not going to tell you the direction we're going. I want you to hold your neck nice and tight, right? Which would be easy for that guy that's on that 90 Day Fiancé show because he doesn't have a neck. Okay, I got someone laughing. I just happened to see that on Discovery last night. I'm like, what in God's name? I think I was watching Paranormal Discovery and I saw that. Right? Boom, 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 boom. So I'm going to start pushing all around. And my goal is to keep the patient. Well, that's actually a disease, by the way. So don't totally pick on him. It's Klippin-Feil syndrome. I want to say it's Klippin. I'll look it up. I can't remember how to spell it right now. I think it's called Klippin-Feil syndrome. It's where the cervical vertebrae are fused. That actually is a condition. So you think about it, if all my cervical vertebrae come fused from birth, right? It's not like the guys at the gym that have no neck. It's hard to pull off. Yeah. It's not like the guys at the gym that have no neck. There it is. Klippin-Feil. Thank you. All right. So agonist reversal is where we're a combination of isotonics. So what I like to think of this one, when I hear this one, I like to think back. Hold on, let me get my little draw tool here. Draw, not text. I go back here to reversal of agonist combined with stabilization reversals. So with this one, I'm going to move the full way through my pattern, but when I get to the end, I'm going to have an isometric hold. And then I'm going to start pushing you back out. We're going to get to the end of the pattern. I'm going to have an isometric hold. I'm going to come back up and across, get to the end of the pattern. I'm going to have an isometric hold. So agonist reversal, I'm moving through both isotonic and isometric contractions. Is that going to fatigue the muscles out? Pretty quickly, right? So yeah, so you're going to, this is one that, this is not going to be one that you do 30 reps of. Most of the time that you're doing this agonist reversal, you're doing 5-6 reps because, man, you get out there and you have that isometric hold, and then you're trying to contract back up and across, and you hit another isometric hold, right? Why is this one a good one? Because now you're not only working concentrically, but you're getting that little bit of eccentric when you get that isometric contraction, right? And it really does work those muscles. That's probably the one that I like the most. So those are kind of, I should have pulled this one out for now, but you got the idea of that one. Because we're going to talk about the stretch techniques. Do we need a break? Or are you guys doing okay? I'd like to kind of power through PNF if we can, and then take a break. Can we do that? Are you still okay, at least for another 10 minutes? All right, cool. All right, so although we talked about this one up here, this one ties into this next section we're going to talk about, which are the stretches. Because PNF is known for its muscle techniques, but we also have the stretches that go along with it. Move that down. One, two, three, four. Yes, that's all of them. Okay, good. I had to think about this for a second. So when you're looking, if you get a question on your boards and you get a question on the stretches, all the stretches are going to be kind of that repeated stretch, repeated contract idea, because there's going to be some sort of a contraction. But they break down further into these contract, relax, or hold, relax stretches. Okay. I should really just break this down a little bit further and go like this, so we have them divided evenly. So when you think of contract, relax, this is kind of what I want you guys to think of, whether you're talking about a hold, relax, or a contract, relax. Contract, relax means there's going to be motion. Hold, relax means there's not going to be motion. Does that make sense? Both of them are going to have a contraction, but one is going to be an isotonic contraction. One is going to be an isometric contraction. So hold means hold, isometric. Contract means contract, movement. The only thing you need to know above that is which muscles are contracting. Whether it's your agonist or your antagonist. That is where people get tripped up the most, not in actually diagnosing or figuring out what these stretches are, is just figuring out what the agonist is and what the antagonist is. For some reason, that just gets boggled up in your brain, and you get kind of brain fog on it, right? So remember, the agonist is the muscle moving you through, yes, moving you through the actual motion, right? So if I am doing elbow flexion, what is my agonist? Biceps, good. What would be my antagonist? Good, right? So that's kind of the idea. So that means if I'm going to stretch into elbow flexion, the triceps are the ones getting stretched. Does that make sense? Because the antagonist is being the stretched muscle. It's the one resisting the motion. Does that make sense? Okay. So if I'm stretching into flexion, right? So the motion I'm doing is elbow flexion. The muscle being stretched is my triceps, because my triceps are resisting that motion. Therefore, they are the antagonist. Does that make sense at least? So we need to know the motion and then the muscles that are resisting and the muscles that aren't. So this is what I did when I got a question, because I got a couple of these questions when I was on my boards. So let me write a question out here and then we'll talk through it. So you are stretching a patient into hip flexion. using the contract, relax, agonist technique. Which muscle is being stretched? Okay, so this would be an easy one because this literally you have to go and go, okay, so if I get this question, I'm getting my whiteboard and I'm going to write agonist, antagonist. So what is my motion for this question? Hip flexion. Okay. So what then would be my muscle that is my muscle group moving me into hip flexion? Well, my quads, right? Iliopsoas, what do you want to call it? Sorry, my hip flexors, right? That means what would be the muscles resisting that? Hamstrings. Good, right? Hamstrings, hip extensors. So you could even argue that with this, the glutes, right? So you could kind of argue glutes a little bit. So then which muscle is being stretched? Well, the answer would be my antagonist, right? The hamstrings. Good. Does everyone see how that question's worded? That's an easy one. At that point, you just have to go down and write your agonist, your antagonist, and go, oh, my antagonist is the one being stretched. So then we're gonna change this. Oh, that wasn't good. So now it says, which muscle will you contract during the stretch? So when we look at this, this one says contract, relax, agonist, contract. If you've written this down on your whiteboard, you have your answer already. You're looking for one of the hip flexors, right? You're going to go down and look for either iliopsoas or quads. And that's it. So with a contract, relax, we're going to have isotonic motion, right? We're going to actually have motion. The only thing we have to figure out whether it's the agonist or the antagonist that we're contracting. So we could contract either of them, right? So if we're talking this stretch here, right, where it says agonist contract, we're going to move the patient up into their end range of hip flexion. We're going to tell them, okay, pull your knee to your chest, pull your knee to your chest, pull your knee to your chest, and relax. And then we're going to stretch them into that new range because we're working on that reciprocal inhibition idea. If I was doing the opposite and I said I was doing contract, relax, antagonist, contract. Well, now I'm going to move them up to their full flexion where I get a little bit of a stretch. And then I'm going to tell them, okay, use your hamstrings, your hips, whatever you want to do. Push down into my hand, push down into my hand, push me towards table, push me towards table. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and relax. And I'm going to move them back up in to the new range of motion. It just depends upon what muscles are my agonist versus my antagonist. If you write them down on your whiteboard, you've got the answer. You just have to figure out which the question is asking you for, right? So if it says muscle moving into, muscle pulling, that would be talking about the agonist. Muscle resisting, muscle stretching, we're talking about the antagonist. Did I lose anyone? Do we need to do another example maybe to help you guys out? Okay. So let's change this to delete, 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 delete. Wait, no. Our stretching. All right, somebody got it. Okay, so take a few seconds before we answer this as a group. Just take a little pen and write down your agonist and antagonist real quick. Don't answer it yet in the chat. Just think to yourself. I should have the Jeopardy theme for this. Do, 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 do. Okay, that should be pretty quick to write those down. So what muscle is my agonist, or what group of muscles is my agonist here? My wrist, what? If I'm moving into extension, then that means my extensor wad. Good. That means my antagonist would be the what? Flexor wad. Good. Now, here's the key for your boards. Make sure you understand which ones are extensors and which ones are flexors. Guess what? Here's a hint. It says it in their name, right? If it's if it says, extensor radialis, then you're an extensor. Flexor radialis, it's a flexor. I'm just saying. Those are easy muscles to know, right? So if you get the group down, you're pretty well. So we've got our extensors and we got our flexor wads doing that, right? And now it won't be abbreviated like I have it abbreviated here, but oftentimes the way you'll see it in the notes is HRANC, right? So this is saying hold, relax, antagonist, contract. So which muscle are we going to isometrically, which group are we going to isometrically contract with this stretch? We're going to isometrically contract our antagonists, so our flexors. Good. So what's that going to look like? So I'm stretching my hand, the patient's hand back into extension, right? So I'm here. I'm going to take them to their end range, and I'm going to say, do me a favor and pull your hand up for me, right? But I'm not going to let them get any movement. I'm going to have them isometrically press against my hand. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and relax. Did everyone see how much more motion I got there? So let me do it with the other hand just so you can see it. So I'm going to put my hand where I can see it. Okay. So that is, yeah, I'm not going anywhere right now. That's pretty locked. So I'm going to tell the patient, push up into my palm. Don't let me push you down. So they're going to isometrically hold. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and relax. Isn't that kind of wild? That wasn't me showing off. Yeah. It's so wild. Right? Even if I do it, and so here's flexion, right? So my antagonist muscles are this way. Don't let me push you down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and relax. It's like magic, isn't it? And you could do it either way, right? I could do the agonist as well. I tend to find I get better results doing antagonist contract muscles because that way I can get that reciprocal inhibition going. But in the clinic and not on your boards, in the clinic, if the antagonist contract doesn't work, what could you try? The agonist contract. Right? These are just tools in your toolbox. And Erica, honestly, I did this once with the martial arts school. I actually taught a whole class on PNF stretching. And they were just absolutely blown away with how much better they could stretch. Now you have to partner people up and stuff like that, right? Which may not be the best in COVID time right now, just now that I think about it. But once we get through COVID, it's pretty amazing how much, you know, like especially those people that are already the high kickers, how much higher they could actually kick after stretching. Because those muscles are nice and kind of limbered up and loosened a little bit. Now, is this better than your traditional slow and low stretching? I mean, maybe. I don't know. Could I combine this with slow and low stretching? Sure. Could I combine this with ballistic stretching? Sure. Do the stretch techniques make sense to everybody? So when we're talking contract, relax, we're actually going to have motion. So let me do a contract, relax. Since I didn't hold, relax, let me do a contract, relax. So my motion I'm going into is extension, right? So if I'm going to do a antagonist, contract, relax, I'm going to put resistance here. I'm going to say, okay, push up into my hand, push 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and relax. The difference there was I allowed what? Movement. Yep, that's the only difference. The fancy terms are tricky, right? They're very tricksy hobbitsies. But in reality, if you just read it and look at it, it's not that hard of a deal. You guys aren't going to get specific questions on like irradiation from actin to myosin and stuff like that. That's really high level advanced PNF stuff. So don't worry about that. The basics are what you need. How's everyone's brain feeling? We a little burnt? Not too bad, actually. Okay. Let's take 10 minutes. We'll come back and we'll talk PNF and finish out with the yeah, lots of homeless people do live in the sewer system. It's kind of, I feel sorry for them. I really do, but it's still kind of scary. Let me just close down Google because it looks like Google is stealing some of my memory. There we go. Now I seem to be better. All right, so we started recording. All right, so let's talk vestibular system now, because we got it. We've hit the high level kind of PNF stuff. Let's hit the kind of high level vestibular system, right? What was, if you remember back when we talked about vestibular, what was the #1 reason a person over the age of 75 goes to the doctor? What's their #1 report? Yeah, falling, right? And associated dizziness. It's the #1 reason they go to the doctor. And why is that? Well, because our ears kind of get worse as we get older, right? The interesting thing here about that is, remember, is that even at like 3 months after that, about at least over 50%, they say 60+% of those people still report dizziness symptoms. And when you go to the doctor, what's the doc going to do for you for dizziness? Has anyone ever gone to the doctor for dizziness problems before, or with a concussion? What did they give you? Yeah, they give you meds, right? They give you Antivert usually, which is, I think, meclizine is the abbreviation, the generic term for that. The brand name is Antivert, anti-vertigo, right? So, you know, what's one of the side effects of those anti-vertigo medications? Does anyone know? Yeah, dizziness and sleepiness. So yeah, Gyra's like, oh, that makes sense. Complete sense. Barfing too, yeah. It is dumb. Now, if you take, and here's the deal, Kelly, and this is probably something they don't explain enough, is that dizziness and that sleepiness for those medications are the side effects in the short term. It's just like your anti-inflammatories and stuff like that. They don't do a good enough job of explaining this, that it takes about 3 days of taking the medication regularly for them to actually have any effect, right? They just tell you, take it, you'll feel better. And the first time you take it, you're like, oh God, I'm worse. And the next thing you do, take that bottle and you chuck it because you don't want to take it anymore, right? This is one of the things I think that education could really help with, Now, is that going to fix the problem? No, it just masks it. Right? What it does when you take those medications is it turns down that firing rate of your ears. And by turning it down, you're less likely to be dizzy, right? But it is kind of dumb. Whereas they could just as easily send us to physical therapy. And then we can look at as a PT, yeah, the head movements do. So that's what we're going to talk about. That's what I was going to say is we can look at it from a PT standpoint and realize, is this something we can treat and get better, right? Or so is it something we can rehabilitate? Or is it something that we can treat and get the patient used to or habituate, right? So the two options for vestibular are rehabilitate or habituate. So rehabilitate or habituate. I think I massively misspelled rehabilitate, but I'm just going to go with it. So they can either rehabilitate or habituate. Rehabilitate means we get them completely better or as close to normal as possible. Habituate meaning, well, they're going to have this problem forever, but what we can do is get them back to as close to normal as we can by getting them used to their new normal. So remember, we talked about a couple of those disorders that are stable versus unstable that we can treat or maybe can't treat. And the one thing we did talk about when we talked about vestibular issues is, yeah, there we go. Yeah, right. The one thing we talked about is it's a lot easier to treat peripheral vestibular symptoms versus central vestibular systems, right? Peripheral meaning out here in the actual inner ear and stuff like that versus central being in the cerebellum. Because we can't exactly go into the brain and go, oh, there's the wire that's crossed. Let's fix that. I mean, we can, but we're not going to do it. I mean, docs can do that. So those head movements that Sakana was talking about, where we have them doing stuff, what we're doing is, if my problem is every time I turn to the right, I get dizzy, we're going to work on that patient turning to the right and doing things until they no longer get as dizzy turning to the right. That's the habituation point. The rehabilitate point would be like, oh, okay, well, the problem is in your inner ear. It's with your stones. If we can get those stones back into the vestibule and get it out of your ear, we can get you back to normal. So that means we have to remember that most of our problems are occurring in that vestibular complex, right? And that vestibular complex is made up of your semicircular ducts or your semicircular canals, right? The anterior, the lateral, and the posterior. For your boards, most of the time, that's about the extent of what you need to know as far as maybe anatomy or so goes with that. I mean, you do also have to remember that you've got those hairs and stuff like that, which we'll talk about. So those semicircular canals handle angular motion of the head. So moving around in angles. Right? Oh, that just got me dizzy. Do you remember what the two organs are that handle up and down, forward and back movements in your inner ear? So let me get on a screen share here so I can get a, no, I don't want this. Wow, this is really moving slow today.
Is it the semicircular canals?
The semicircular canals are the ones that handle that, the angular movement, right? So we have, let me get my little texting up here now that I got it working. So semicircular canals, angular movement. And then we have the utricle and the saccule. You remember those two? All right. So remember I told you that the easy way to remember those is when you're in a sac race, you're jumping up and down. So the saccule handles up and down versus, I didn't have one for utricle, maybe you go forward, right? Utricle is linear, so forward and back. So all three of those work together in general human movement, right? It's not like if I'm moving my head, I'm like, go down, turn to the side, rotate. No, I don't do them in individual motions. If I'm turning quick, I've got to move all of those. So all of those are going to involve when I move my head. But they all kind of balance out our motion in the inner ear. All of those are areas that we can end up with all kinds of problems, right? Do you remember what all of those areas are lined with? What are they all lined with? Hair. Yeah, good, right? You have those hairs that are in your inner ear. So you have your stereo cilia. I had to make sure I spelled it right. And your cilia, right? Do you remember which one of those two were the bigger of the two? Which one's going to be the bigger payout downtown? If you go downtown right now, which one of those is a game you can win money at? The kinocilia. There you go. That's the way I've always remembered it. Is the kinocilia your big ones? You had 50-50, right? That's why we're talking about it. The kinocilia are your big ones, right? Those are the ones you can win big money with. That's the way I always remembered it. And if you're listening stuff in stereo, it's all around you. And so they're smaller. That's the way I know it's a silly way to remember it, but I try to give you my ways of remembering it. So the stereocilia surround those kinocilia. And as those little fibers move around, they have the ability to move the big fiber. And that big fiber will cause that polarization or depolarization to occur in your inner ears, right? So let me get my little draw tool up here. So here I have my big kinocilia. And then around outside, this is going to look really bad. I can already see my drawing. I have all my stereocilia. And so as these little ones move, depending upon how much they move, they can end up deflecting the big one. And then above them, right, they all sit in this gelatinous matrix, right? This goo, right? What's that goo called? That they all sit in. It's inside your body, and it's from the lymphatic system, or it's contained in the ear, and it's from the lymphatic system. So it's endolymph, right? So you have this goo in here, right? This is the fluid in your ear, in your inner ear, that handles your balance. Yeah, so you got lymph fluid, right? Endolymph. It contained lymph. On top of that endolymph, what do you have? What's kind of floating in the endolymph? The otoliths. Good. See, you guys remember this, right? You have those little, or as the patients like to call them, the rocks in my ears. Right? The otoliths. So all of this makes up that inner ear thing, right? As these rocks kind of shift around because of weight, they move the endolymph, right? They move the endolymph, which then deflects the small hairs, right? Which I have drawn here, which then deflects the big hairs. That's kind of a lot of little tiny parts to move that can cause problems, right? That's why vestibular is kind of difficult, because that's a lot of moving parts, and we have to determine which is the problem. Because looking at all of these, it could be any of them. It could be the stereocilia, it could be the kinocilia, could be the endolymph, right? What could be the problem with the endolymph? What could be wrong with the fluid in the ears? Yeah, it's not moving smoothly, right? It's too gooey because maybe they're dehydrated. And that happens. You guys have all experienced that, or maybe not all of you, But I'm willing to bet most of you have experienced a time when your endolymph maybe wasn't moving as smoothly as possible because you're a little dehydrated. Maybe it might have been on a Friday or a Saturday night. Right? And you went out and you had a little too much ETOH, and that kind of dries out your endolymph a little bit. That gets, and the brain gets messed up to begin with, but your endolymph gets a little dried out. It doesn't move as smoothly. And that's when you're walking the cowboy gait, right? With your arms out. Oh, I got this. I'm good. I'm good. I go home. Take me drunk. I'm home. Right? Your inner ear gets kind of out of balance even at that point. But as we get older, and I've noticed this as I've gotten older, especially because I'm a lot older than most of you guys, I've noticed my balance isn't as good as I used to be, especially like when I'm doing martial arts techniques or practicing. I don't have the same crispness of balance that I had when I was, 16. Because that endolymph is just kind of getting worn out. I'm getting old, unfortunately. Soon I'll be put out to pasture. So that's, and then remember we talked, excuse me, sorry. We talked briefly about, remember that whole action potential curve going on in the ear, right? So most of the next question I have is how much of the action potential of the ear do I have to remember? You usually don't have to remember much about the action potential of the ear, but you do have to remember the action potential curve, right? So at baseline, what voltage am I? About, yeah, minus 70, right? So minus 70 millivolts. What does it take to fire off an action potential about? Takes me to go positive to about what? Because remember, I can have those little graded potentials that don't do anything. But then I hit this point where I go above about minus 50 to 55 millivolts. And at that point, the action potential occurs, right? What is this process called going this way? I am moving away from being polarized, so I am depolarizing. Good. Right, so I'm depolarizing. And then the reverse happens. Once I'm done with that action potential, I send it down. I end up down here where no further action potential can occur. And at that point, I am really, really polarized. So I am hyperpolarized. Good. And then the process of me returning to minus 70 is called what? Repolarization. Right, good. So do I need to know that specifically for the inner ear? I know that's why we're covering it, Kelly. That's why I make sure I kind of cover this for your boards because this is one that's been a while, right? So remember, like maybe I send a signal, I'm holding a weight, and I'm not sending enough of a signal to contract. So I get those little graded potentials. And then eventually I send enough of a signal to make that nerve go more positive towards that minus 50 to 55. And I send the signal, and the signal comes back and it fires off the muscles and I can contract. And then for a while after that, I can't contract anymore. So I end up in that hyperpolarized state until I repolarize. So for your boards, yeah, you do have to understand this. The important thing to understand for your boards is remembering the minus 70 and minus 50 to 55. Those are two important numbers to remember. They don't really ever ask you what's the peak of depolarization or what's the peak of hyperpolarization. They don't really talk about that too much because there's a lot of debate between those two, right? You do have to know that depolarization is the conduction moving down the nerves. Hyperpolarization is when no further action potential can go. And then repolarization is the move back to kind of, and I say neutral, it's not neutral, but the neutral charge of minus 70. Does everyone kind of remember that now after talking about it? I know that really kicked some dust off the brain cells up there. So what kind of dusting off the attic, exactly. So what kind of a question could you get about this? Well, they may ask you, they may say that a nerve is firing off an action potential. What is the term for the nerve becoming more positive? That would be depolarization, right? What would be the term for a nerve that can no longer send a signal down the nerve? If it can't send it anymore, it is super polarized, so it is hyperpolarized. Good. And then what would be the term to return to resting membrane potential would be repolarization. One other question that may happen, because I'm going to redraw that action potential curve here real quick. So remember, I said the fire off is about -55 and the resting is about -70. What can happen to this -55 if you get a lot of little graded potentials? Do you remember that from neuro back in anatomy? So you're sending a lot of sub-action potential signals. What can happen to this like fire off point? You actually can desensitize the nerve a little bit, and you may move this up to -50 or maybe -45, where it takes a lot more of a signal to trigger that depolarization, right? And the way I always think about this one is, if you're sitting at home and you're a parent and you hear your kids fighting, and it's just the normal fighting that you hear every day, you'll hear it, you'll tell them to stop, they won't stop, you'll tell them to stop, it won't stop, and you just kind of get numb to the signal of that coming in. And then at some point you hear a crash. Now you've got a greater action potential coming along, so now you jump into action and you go see who broke something, right? That's kind of the idea of a graded potential, is you kind of get a little bit numb to all these little signals coming in, and it takes a little bit more to trigger you into action. I thought the kids example is always one that was one of my instructors. I was pretty confident when he taught me that he just didn't care about his kids. But what do I know? And that kind of comes along the lines of walking into a stinky room, right? You walk into the stinky room, you get a nerve action potential right away. You're like, oh, God, that's horrible, right? And then you sit in that room longer and longer, and what happens to the smell? Kind of acclimated to it, right? You're like, okay, I can handle this. And then maybe somebody rips one off, and now the smell gets worse. Now, oh, action potential again, action potential. Same idea there. It happens with wound care sometimes. When you open up a gangrenous wound, you're like, oh God, that's bad. That's bad. And you're cleaning, you're like, hey, I don't smell it anymore. And then you find a spot that you're cleaning, and another bit of that gaseous emanation comes up and hits you, and you're like, oh God, there it is again. I'm gonna vomit. That's nothing more than an action potential. So if you know that -70 is kind of our resting membrane potential, do you remember kind of what the resting hertz of both ears are? So remember, they have a resting kind of firing signal. They just kind of rest at a certain pulse per second. Guess what the bottom number is going to be? 70. Yeah. So you have 70 to about 100 hertz is that resting firing rate of both ears. Right? So somewhere between 70 and 100 hertz. That ties right back to that action potential. right? And why would we maybe be higher? Well, maybe we've gotten some graded potentials that kind of move that hertz up, right? So 70 to 100 hertz, depending upon what we're doing, are spikes per second. And so if they're both firing at 70, if I turn my head to the right and this one goes to 90, what should this one over here go to? 50, yeah, right? If one goes up by 20, the other usually goes down by 20. It's not always that perfect, but in general, that's what happens. So if one goes up, the other goes down. That's telling your head, I'm moving to the right. I'm moving to the left. I'm moving up. I'm moving down. That's how those things kind of fire off. So that's the kind of brief inner ear type function. That inner ear is going to tie into your eye, right? Because if I turn to my left, my ear tells me when I'm turning to my left. My eye should also tell me I'm turning to the left. When they work in sync, your vestibular system is great, right? You're able to kind of maintain normal equilibrium. But if your ear is telling you you're moving to the right and your eyes are like, no, I'm not, I'm right on dead center, well, then you've got a mismatch and you can end up with problems, right? That can be where dizziness comes in. So along with that, with turning my head, if I turn my head to the right, if I'm focusing on you guys, right? And I turn my head to the right, trying to stay focused on you guys, my eyes are going to move to the right at the same speed, but then should come back to center at the same speed. So if I move 4 meters a second this way, my eyes should move back to the center at 4 meters per second, right? That's that gain and phase idea. Do you remember briefly talking about that? So gain is the timing. Phase is the ratio. What should your ratio be if everything is normal? If I move my head 4 meters a second this way, yeah, 1 to 1. Good. If my ratio is off, that's where I'm getting a mismatch. And you can see that with patients, right? You see that on the cop show when they're doing that eye testing. All right, keep your eye focused on this pencil and turn your head to the left. They turn their head to the left, the eye moves and it retracts back. That's things being out of gain, right? So we know that if that phase is off, we've got to fix it. We've got to work on them accommodating it. Excuse me, sorry. So then we've got a couple of those terms that we've talked about briefly, where we talked about things like smooth pursuit and saccades. And then we also had the, oh my God, am I drawing a blank? Nystagmus. There we go. Right? So smooth pursuits. Trying to find a pen. No, I got a flashlight. That'll work. So smooth pursuits means if I'm telling myself to follow this pen, right, my eye should be able to follow it smoothly without any jerky motion. If I get jerky motion going on the eye, what is that called? The herky-jerky motion in the eye is now the nystagmus, right? That's where the eye kind of twitches and does stuff it's not supposed to do. So I'm watching a patient's eyes. I'm like, okay, follow my pen. And it tracks over, but it kind of jumps as it's tracking. That means the patient has nystagmus. It happens when we spin them around in circles and everything else as well. But any of that herky-jerkiness of the eyes is nystagmus. Do you remember what saccades was? Anyone? Does the light even work? Hey, the light does work. How about that? Yeah, right? When I think of saccades, I think of myself driving down I'm sitting in the passenger seat of a car and somebody's driving me down the road. Saccades is my ability to look at a tree, see it go by me and focus on the next tree. Does that make sense? Some of you probably do have a little bit of motion sickness. Does anyone have that here? Right? And what happens if you were to watch the trees going by? Yeah, you're probably get dizzy and a little bit nauseated, right? So they tell you focus on the horizon, right? Stare straight ahead. Don't look at the stuff going by you because that kicks your motion sickness up, right? If you're on a roller coaster and you get motion sick, if you focus on the head directly in front of you, you can really help that motion sickness. Reading in a car, exactly, right? Well, why is that? Well, because your inner ear system is saying you're moving, and what's your eye saying? I'm not. And so there's that mismatch going on, and your brain just can't coordinate that. It doesn't understand it. It's not really a big deal, but it can be obnoxious, right? Somebody tells you, hey, break out the map or look at your phone and tell me if we're going the right direction. You break down, you're starting to look at it, you're like, oh, that doesn't feel good. Right? So that's those three terms of saccades, smooth pursuit, and then your nystagmus. And the nystagmus we're going to use because that can help us determine where maybe in the inner ear the problem is. Right? If it's going one direction, it tells us it's one of the semicircular canals. If it's going another direction, it may be a different semicircular canal. If it's going all over, we may realize it's not any of the semicircular canals. So that nystagmus, that weird eye movement, can tell us a lot about what's going on in the patient's vestibular system. And we have all those fancy movements and stuff like that. Are you going to get questions on vestibular about, what's the difference between an Epley versus a Semont? Probably not. The main thing, if you get a question about Epley or a Semont maneuver, you know that they're dealing with BPPV, right? Benign positional proximal vertigo. Positional proximal positional. Either way, right? The BPPV, paroxysmal, exactly, not paroxysmal. Paroxysmal, right? Meaning occurring for no reason. So that's what those come along the lines for. You don't really have to, they're not going to ask you, in order to perform the Semont maneuver, what position would you put the patient? No, they're not going to, that's much further down the line in getting vestibular specialized. But they may ask you if the patient, you're performing a Semont maneuver, what is the likely cause? In that point, you would go, oh, well, it's BPPV. Right? We're not going to do the Semont or the Epley for a patient that has an inner ear infection. It's not going to help them. Right? They need antibiotics. There's nothing, we can't stick our finger in their ear and go, oh, there's the infection and pull it out. It's not the way it works. But most of the times when we're dealing with issues in physical therapy, we're dealing with that problem of BPPV. So our two main conditions we treat when we're talking about vestibular systems are either BPPV or hypofunction, meaning that we have reduced function in one of our vestibular sides, right? We can either have unilateral, one of the inner ears is not functioning well, or we can have bilateral hypofunction. As we get older, we're likely to get bilateral hypofunction of the vestibular system because things just start breaking down. So that's pretty much, I'm trying to think if there's anything else to talk about it. What would be some maybe contraindications to treating a patient with vestibular issues? Do you remember any of those? So patient comes in for vestibular treatment. Okay, yeah, fracture specifically of what? Anything in the cervical, skulls, could have legs to you, right? Anything in the cervical spine, skull region, we're kind of going to worry about that, right? What if I come in, I'm sure you're treating me and I'm like, man, suddenly my ear's ringing. Is that a bad sign? Yeah, right. That would be another one. That's the major one they're going to ask you guys about. Could be a blood pressure change, absolutely. Could also be that they've got a condition that we can't treat, right? Could be perilymphatic fistula, could be, Meniere's disease, could be just about anything at that point. It's something we're not going to diagnose. So we just kind of watch and talk to them. Okay, what are you feeling? What are you hearing? What are you seeing? The only other condition that kind of mimics vestibular issues is this thing that's called VBI, or vertebral basilar insufficiency. This is the one mistake sometimes we make in treating with patients that we suspect have, something in their inner ear, because they may look like they have inner ear issues, but in reality, they have this condition called VBI, or vertebral basilar insufficiency. And if you look at this, if you get a question on VBI, it'll talk about vertebral basilar insufficiency. And if you look at it, it makes sense to your brain. Vertebral, dealing with the vertebral arteries. Basilar, dealing with the basilar artery at the base of the brain, right? Insufficiency, meaning what? Not enough blood. Yeah, right? So these patients a lot of times will say, yeah, I get dizzy, but when I really get dizzy is when I look up. And that really gets me dizzy. What's happening when they look up back in the spine? Yeah, right. So you've got, let me get, here's my spinal cord, right? Here's my vertebrae around my spinal cord. On either side of that, I've got those vertebral arteries. And when I lean back, like I'm leaning back, I can get a kink in one of those arteries. Now, you're not necessarily going to pass out because you still have your carotids, right, that are providing blood flow to the brain. But there's a reduction in that basilar artery. And because there's a reduction in that basilar artery, what does that basilar artery feed? What part of the brain? If it's at the base of the brain, it's feeding what's the base of the brain called? Come on. Simple anatomy. The pons, good, right? Where that whole area is called the brainstem. Right? So that brainstem, all of that autonomic system. So that's why they lean back and they're like, oh God, I don't feel so good. Right? Because they lose a little bit of blood flow to that autonomic system. That's the body saying, we got a problem. And so I saw that, who was it that said, Adrian asked about, is this the one where you drop them from sitting to supine and watch something for their eyes? That can happen. That's actually the test that we do. What was that test called? Do you remember? So the repositioning maneuver is the Epley. I did it in the clinical and I had no idea what I was doing. That's fantastic. I love it, right? So when we do the Epley, which is the maneuver to replace it, right? We're actually going to look at going, okay, what is the problem? We're actually looking to see if we have an nystagmus. It's Dix-Hallpike. There we go. Alexa remembered it. The Dix-Hallpike. The Dix-Hallpike is the test. The Epley is the treatment. Does that make sense? Dix-Hallpike is the test. That's where you lean them back and you watch their eyes. And then we're going to go right from the Dix-Hallpike into the Epley to treat them. If it is BPPV, yes, Epley is a repositioning. If it is BPPV. But sometimes when we do that Dix-Hallpike, when we tilt their head back, the problem isn't the inner ear. The problem is those arteries in the back of the neck. And a lot of time you'll get that because you'll get them tilted back like that. You're watching their eyes and there's no movement. There's no nystagmus going on. And they're like, oh, the dizziness is worse. Oh, I'm getting a pounding headache. At that point, if you hear that, what should you probably do to the patient? Oh, I'm getting a pounding headache. Oh, the dizziness is getting worse. And there's no nystagmus. Yeah, sit them back up. Right? At that point, it's blood flow. It's not vestibular. Can we do much about the blood flow? Not really. Yeah, right. If it's a blood flow issue, they may have to see a cardiologist or somebody somebody that specializes in the arteries. Maybe they're stenotic, right, where the arteries are hardening, or maybe they've got a lot of arthritis buildup back there, and they might have to see a neurosurgeon to have some surgery to clean out those areas around the canals. So there's not much we can do about that. We can look at it and go, oh, hey, right? And so Adrian said he did it in the clinic and it was just weird, right? It is. The first time you do it, it's weird until you start seeing how the patient kind of reacts to it. And then once you do it a couple times, you actually get a little bit better at it. You understand what you're doing. But the first time you do any type of canalith repositioning, you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing here. I don't know why I'm doing it, but they told me to do it, so I'm just going to do it. That's usually what I hear from students. That is pretty much, I mean, literally the level at what you need to know for vestibulars. You don't have to know a ton. You do have to know a little bit about a lot of stuff, but not a ton. This is not one of those conditions where you have to know everything about everything for vestibular, because vestibular in itself, much like lymphatics, is a specialized topic. So you don't necessarily need to know everything about it. And if you do know everything about it, congratulations, you're smarter than me even. And nobody's smarter than me. I'm just joking. Yeah, right. There's a real good point. So Jair says, I assume this test is also dangerous for somebody with iron or chiari malformation. Absolutely. Right? Because you could compress that brainstem that's squeezing out, right? Does that mean that we're not going to treat them? No, it means that I probably, if I've got somebody with an Arnold-Chiari malformation, I'm not going to want to do it. I'm probably going to defer to the PT, right? I'd rather them do that at that point and maybe me take their general exercise patient, because, well, they get paid the big bucks and have better insurance. I'm just joking. But it is true. When I get stuff like that, when I get those really, really kind of specialized cases that might be unique and it's something that it's either I'm A, not comfortable with, or B, I'm going, hey, you know what? I really think this needs kind of a little bit more advanced of a touch. I'm probably going to default to my PT and say, hey, who do you have at 12:30? Because I've got Joe and I may need you for a few minutes to do the Epley with him. You know, remember, he's got that Arnold-Chiari malformation, and he's like, oh, yeah, Joe. And maybe for 15 minutes, you go treat his patient so that he can handle the more dangerous points, right? Same thing with like spinal mobilizations. Could we theoretically do spinal mobilizations? I mean, sure, we theoretically could. I am not saying we do spinal manipulations. I'm just saying theoretically we could. But that's one of those that I'm really kind of leery about because I'm not specialized in it. I'm not going to want to necessarily do spinal manipulations on a patient and injure them. So for vestibular, as you can see, although that class was really long and really kind of painful, it's more really long and really painful because we have a lot of vestibular specialized clinics in town, and you need to understand it. For the boards, not as much for the boards. Right? There's a lot more PNF than there is vestibular. And so that kind of comes to my last topic of the day, right? My last topic of the day is talking about imaging. What if a patient says, hey, they said my whatever, my MRI, my X-ray, whatever is back in my chart. Can you tell me what it says? We just go over to the chart and be like, according to your radiologist, it says that you have a perilymphatic fistula in the, no. Right? Yeah, honestly, I usually just defer to the nurse at that point. You know, I will openly say, I'm like, I'm not trained in reading your x-ray, but I can let your nurse know you'd like to kind of go over it. And once I'm done with PT, we'll talk about it. So don't get trapped in that, because here's the deal, especially when you guys are students, you want to try to answer everything. And not all of it needs to be answered. Some of it is just one of those where we just go, I don't know the answer to that. So let's talk a little bit about imaging, because we do have to know about imaging, is we have to know the kind of different types of imaging and what do they mean. So we may have, and well, that's, my hands can't type today. I'm gonna come up with the common ones that would be our normal one. LP, MRI. Oh, there's one other, PET. All right, so those are kind of the most common imaging studies you're going to see on a patient's chart. Out of all, oh, we also have the old-fashioned one too. Out of all of those, you guys are almost expected to not read any of them. If anything, the one that you might be most expected to understand is an X-ray. And an X-ray is pretty simple, right? X-ray is going to show us what? What is the main thing we take X-rays for? Yeah, fractures, right? So when we talk X-ray, we're talking hard tissue. We're looking for fractures. And I'm going to be honest, if you can't look at an X-ray and can't see a fracture, I can't help you. Just saying. Because usually it's pretty easy to clearly see a fracture. Now, you may not be specialized in seeing stuff like green stick fractures or spiral fractures and stuff like that, but you can usually look at an X-ray and go, yeah, something broken there. Now, it doesn't mean we talk to a patient about that, but there are times where it might be beneficial. Why might it be beneficial to look at the X-ray before you see the patient? Why might it be beneficial? Yeah, contraindications, right? I see they've had an X-ray, like, especially if I'm in the inpatient world, I'm like, they just went for an X-ray? What the heck? I may want to look at that X-ray and go, oh crap, they've got a sacral fracture now. I may have to waive off treatment until the PT sees them, right? Or I may be looking going, oh, okay, so the fracture is mid-humerus. I just have to make sure I don't grab a hold of that, because sometimes we make stupid mistakes like that, where maybe they're in a sling until they can get in for surgery, and you sit them up and you end up grabbing right a hold of that mid-humeral fracture. And at that point, it's no longer funny. It's no longer humorous. I've been waiting all day for that one. An arteriograph. What do you think that's going to be a imaging study of? Yeah, arteries, right? It says it in the name. It's not that I mean, it is difficult, but usually with an arteriograph, they're going to inject a nuclear dye into them, like the DYE, not DIE. They're not going to inject them with dye. I've had a patient freak out about that. They're going to inject me with dye tomorrow. Am I going to live? No. Dye, like in change the color. Oh, well, that makes much more sense. Sometimes patients get a little freaked out about the silliest things, right? So that dye is going to cause their arteries to light up, right? It's going to kind of make them glow like a Christmas tree in their in the imaging. What can we maybe find with arteriographs? What do you think we're looking for? What do you think we could find if we're following the arteries around? Blockages, right? Yeah. Or the other thing we can find is hemorrhages, right? Because if we're following an artery around maybe the shoulder and all of a sudden we see that it diffusely spreads into the whole axilla, we know that they might have a hemorrhage that's bleeding into the axilla, right? And that can help the doctor determine what he needs to do. Maybe he has to go in and surgically seal that. Or for clots, we may have to go in and the doc may have to go in and take out the clot, whatever they do for clots, right? They may have to give them clot busters. An arthrograph. Arthro meaning what? Joint. Right, so an arthrograph, we're literally looking at the joint. They may again inject some dye into that joint area to kind of light the whole joint up to look what's the joint space, right? Maybe there's so much arthritis that the joint space is closed off. Ooh, that's bad. We might have to go and do some surgery for that, right? Or maybe you've got some of the soft tissue that's kind of ended up wrapped around and they have to go in and clean that stuff out. The arthrograph is just looking at what is the patency or the integrity of a joint. What joints could we do it on? Every single joint in the human body. Right? Theoretically, they could do it on just about every joint in the body. They could do it in individual spinal joints if they wanted to. But an arthrograph, again, we're just breaking it down. Bone scan. What do you think we're looking for in bone scans? I mean, bone scans can detect fractures, but that's not their primary job. Yeah, density, integrity, bone cancer. Yeah, right? So we could be looking at the intensity or the density or the integrity of bones, seeing if the bones are actually, again, patent, if they're functional, right? Looking at the difference between the calcified, the hard bone versus the soft bone, right? Spongy bone. We could be looking at, is the spongy bone calcified, right? Renee said calcification. Maybe most of that nice spongy bone is now calcified. That could be problematic, especially if it's femur, right? We may look at if post-surgery or post-fracture. Maybe we're looking at the callus and how the callus is formed around the fracture, right? Do they have to go in and re-break the bone to reset it? The main thing you'll hear a lot of patients with bone scans for is that cancer diagnosis. Usually, if you hear somebody going for a bone scan, it's not a good thing. Because they usually at that point are suspecting some form of cancer. Right? So that doesn't mean you go into the patient and like, oh, I see you're having a bone scan tomorrow. Well, I'm sorry about your life. No, just wrong. Right? I joke about it, but I've seen it happen before. I've actually seen stuff like that happen. So the only reason I joke about it, right? That's just where we go, oh, they're going to have a bone scan. So we're suspecting something's wrong with their body. If you see maybe that it's a new bone scan ordered and you're coming to see them at 8 o'clock in the morning, what might you want to do? So they're in the inpatient world. You see that you're down in the PT clinic and it says, oh, patient scheduled for a bone scan at 9 a.m. And we're supposed to see them at 8. Might want to do what? Might want to reschedule. Yeah, or withhold, right? That may be one where I go up to the patient's room and I say, hey, hey, Jaira, good to see you. Hey, saw that they scheduled you for a test at 9 o'clock. Tell you what, I know that test normally takes about an hour to 2 hours. I'll come back and I'll check on you around noon and see how you're feeling. If not, maybe we'll hold off therapy till this afternoon. Because wouldn't it suck for you, it's a technical term, right? for you to get them up and get them moving. And in reality, what they're looking for is bone cancer of the femur, and you fracture the femur. Right? So that may be one of those where I'm like, oh, bone scan, I'm going to hold off a little bit. Right? Come back at a little bit later time. I'm going to move CT and MRI close to each other actually here, if you don't mind. I'm going to come down here and move MRI out of there. Because they both do similar techniques, right? A CT is just a really powerful X-ray. An MRI is a magnetic resonance imaging, which means there's no radiation. But they are both going to do slice level images of the body. Right? So both these can get me slice imaging, right, of the body and 3D mapping. Both do take forever, right? The MRI is a little less invasive, but the MRI then takes you into that tube that just makes tons of noise, whereas the CT still noisy, but not as noisy as being in the tube, right? If I'm worried about those, and here's the deal is, remember, every X-ray that you get in your body, it does make you feel, yeah, you're right. It does make you feel like that, Erica. Erica says it makes you feel like you're peeing your pants. You're exactly right. Sometimes it does. Every X-ray, every CT scan, every even PET scan that we're going to talk about down there, every one of those scans increases your chance to get cancer. Just to warn you, it does. Because you're getting irradiated by radiation. Yeah. Which is why a lot of times MRIs are a little bit better for that, because MRIs do not irradiate you. But the downside is MRIs are usually a little bit more expensive and they're a little bit more uncomfortable. Right? Pretty much most of us had an MRI at some point in our life. And getting in that little tube of death is kind of paranoia inducing, isn't it? You know, I've had an MRI of my whole neck, and sitting in there like this for 30 minutes without moving, whew, it's freaky. Right? And they give you headphones like, okay, here's some music to knock out the sound of the MRI. It doesn't. Right? It's like you get the music, you're like, oh, it's really loud. And then the MRI comes on and go, I can't hear the music anymore. But both of those kind of let us look at the body in kind of a 3D imaging. Now, the CT is kind of the gold standard. We've had it forever, right? The MRI is kind of the young up and coming. And now there are all kinds of level of magnets of MRIs that are out there, that there are even some MRIs that exceed the level of detail for CTs. You know, I'm thinking specifically out at USC, there's a new, I think they're called stage 5 MRI. I forget what they're called. But literally it can get down to like almost a cellular level on the human body. Yeah, and it's really cool. Like some of the stuff we're developing now is really cool. But the thing is, in order to have an MRI that gets that detailed, that magnet has to be huge, right? So that magnetic force is huge, which means you have to have a larger room, which also means you have to make sure the room has no metal anywhere in the room, right? I'm sure we've all saw Venom at some point and saw how they use magnetic sound to get them out. Yeah, same idea there. Just imagine if you have metal in your body that's magnetic and you get into a giant MRI. Not going to be a good day, right? I remember we had one patient back when I was in York, Pennsylvania, that came from the prison. And we put him in a MRI, and what we didn't know is he had prison tats all over his chest. Oh, was it an episode of House 2? That's fantastic. That for some reason does not surprise me. I'd have to go find that now. But a lot of prison tats, I'll answer that in a second, Renee. A lot of the prison tats, they use metal to make the ink that they design better. Well, you get that injected in your body, and then you go in an MRI. Guess what happens to that metal? It's yanked right out of your skin. So that could be painful as well. So we have to make sure that we don't have anything like that, right? So Renee asked off topic, but cancer patients go through radiation. Yeah. So there's different types of radiation. And actually, yes, the radiation they get to kill cancer can cause other cancer. That's the kind of scary part. They can get radiation to kill cancer that may cause them to get other forms of cancer. I've seen patients that have had like a brain tumor excised with radiation that later gets leukemia. Or maybe they had, liver cancer and they had the liver cancer excised with radiation and now they've got colon cancer. So that's why when we're getting radiation treatment, we really have to be focused and make sure the docs have to really kind of specify and make sure they only hit that cancerous tissue. The idea of radiation treatment is we're going to send that radiation in a really tight beam and lyse the cancerous tissue, right? Lyse meaning making it explode. And hopefully it does that, but the downside to that is now we've got kind of nasty tissue that's floating around. Hopefully we can either get it out or the body reabsorbs it, or the cancer can spread. It's a risk we take, and sometimes we have to look at that going, well, I can either hopefully give you radiation that will cure your heart cancer and maybe give you leukemia, or you can die in 6 months. It's a tough gamble, right? Cancer is not a fun disease. All right, so we talked about MRI, we talked about CT. What is an EMG? It's an electromyography. Right, so electromyography, what are we looking at? Nerve conduction to muscles, that's all it is. And some PTs can actually be trained in doing EMGs. I've seen some PTs that are really specialized in doing EMGs with patients. It's not that invasive. You're just sticking little needles in. It's a little uncomfortable, but I've seen patients that do EMGs. So if that's an electromyography, what's the ECG? Come on, where is my good old Eric at here? Yeah, an electrocardiogram, right? What are we looking at for electrocardiogram? I know, that's why I brought you in. Rates and rhythms. Yeah, we're looking at the heart. And remember, with an EMG, actually, when we look at EMG, ECG, or EEG, we're only looking at a snapshot. When we do that test, that's all we can really look at. It doesn't tell us what's going to happen in 6 months. It doesn't tell us what happened 6 months ago. It just tells us what the patient is when they had that test. Because some patients, especially with electrocardiograms, they go in and everything looks normal, right? The heart rate looks normal, the beat, the pulse, everything. They're like, well, the EE or the ECG looks normal. And then 2 hours later, they have a heart attack. Well, because the ECG only shows that snapshot. And if they don't have any type of pathology at that given moment, it doesn't really tell us much. That's why the ECGs are usually on them for a longer period of time, right? So we can track it over a period of time. So electrocardiogram is dealing with the heart. What's the EEG? Another electro. Yeah, and I'm going to spell this wrong. Electroencephalogram. So now we're looking at the electrical conductivity of the brain. And those are probably my favorite things to look at just because they're so neat looking. We can see like the electrical conductivity and what's going on in the brain, what side's firing more frequently, what side's not firing more frequently. We can tell sometimes with traumatic brain injuries, what part of the brain was injured, because there's going to be more electrical activity on the side where the injury occurs, right? Because the brain's going to try to heal it. Those are actually pretty cool to me. Right, what about a fluoroscopy? Whenever you see some sort of fluoroscopy, because we can tie fluoroscopy into CTs. We can tie fluoroscopies into arteriographs. We can tie fluoroscopies into arthrographs. Fluoro means we're injecting dye. Right? So that's when we're actually getting stuff to light up. What about an LP? What's an LP? You'll hear this quite frequently. LP is a lumbar puncture. What are they going in and getting at that point? Fluid. What type of fluid? They're going to bend you over a table and they're going to stick a big needle right between your vertebrae and go into that subarachnoid space. Yeah, they're doing a spinal tap. Exactly, just like the group. And they're going to take out a little bit of CSF. Right? Do you think that's painful? Just nod your heads. The LPs are not fun. The patients do not like them. They hurt like the dickens. They're not much fun. So we're looking typically for problems with the CSF here. We could also be looking for MS, multiple sclerosis, because that fluid can tell us stuff. X-ray we talked about. PET scan, we're going to stick a cat into an X-ray, right? That's a PET scan. PET scan is, yeah, not Mr. Snuggles. PET scan is positron emission tomography, means really powerful X-rays. That's what I want you to remember with that. A PET scan means it's a really, 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 really potent X-ray. And a lot of times at that point, we might be looking for cancers in areas that maybe aren't bony. Like we might be looking PET scans of the stomach, PET scans of the brain, stuff like that. A lot of patients with brain tumors get PET scans. So it's a really, really, really high density imaging. We also know that that's going to be a lot of radiation. So that also puts us at more risk for cancer, right? Think your risk for a regular X-ray is like 1 in 100. I want to say with a chest X-ray, it's 1 in 50. And I think with a PET, it's 1 in 10. Don't quote me on those numbers. Please don't, like Mr. McHuber said, no, I forget off the top of my head. So yeah, you can see how the more energy you're getting in the body, the greater chance you have differentiation. Ultrasound. When do we normally see ultrasound that's not physical therapy related? When people have parasites, yes, babies, pregnancies. We can also do ultrasounds of arteries, like specifically of the carotids, because they're really superficial and easy to see the carotids, and also the jugulars. Oh my God, my brain just literally shut down for a second, right? That's it for imaging. You don't have to be able to read them. You just have to know what they are. These on the head. Yeah, exactly, right? You can get the imaging of those vessels of the eye, definitely. That's it for imaging. You don't have to understand how to read them. You don't have to understand necessarily, what specifically, you're never going to have to say, well, we have a patient that's got a fracture. Which of the following imagings would you recommend? We're not going to recommend that. We just have to understand if it says that a patient is going for a bone scan, they're likely going for a cancer scan or a PET scan, same thing. Does that make sense? The main ones that we're going to deal with in the physical therapy world are MRIs and X-rays. And once you get more trained, maybe you can start understanding an MRI. I'm still kind of honing my skills at reading MRIs. I'm still not the best at it. But I can usually, especially if it's a spinal MRI, kind of look where the problems are. Yeah, and they're a little difficult. It's not like it's easy to see until somebody kind of shows you what you're looking for, right, Jaira? It's not like you look at an MRI and you're like, oh, right there's the problem. You have to understand the weighting of the MRI and what you're looking at, because otherwise it just looks like a blob on your screen. Like, what am I looking at? I'll see if I can dig out. I think I've got my spinal MRI. If I can find that, maybe next class tomorrow, I'll bring it up and we can just take a peek at it. That way you can see kind of what it looks like. I think I have it in my drawer here. I just have to figure out. Just have to figure out if I have an external CD drive somewhere. All right, I'm gonna stop